Have you ever noticed how the people who speak the least often hold the most power? How those who withdraw into silence seem to attract everything they never chased? There's a peculiar force at work here, something Carl Jung spent decades exploring, a force that most of us overlook because we're too busy performing, explaining, proving ourselves to a world that may never truly understand. Jung discovered something profound about human energy. He observed that when we scatter our attention outward, constantly seeking validation, endlessly explaining ourselves, we become like a radio transmitting on too many frequencies at once. The signal becomes noise, but when we withdraw that energy, when we choose silence and turn inward, something shifts, not just within us, but in the very fabric of how reality responds to us. This isn't mysticism. This is the mechanics of the psyche. Jung called it synchronicity, the phenomenon where inner transformation creates outer resonance. When you focus on yourself in silence, you're not running away from the world. You're tuning yourself like an instrument. And once tuned, you begin to attract the very things you stop chasing. The question is, are you ready to understand why silence makes you magnetic? Why focusing on yourself isn't selfishness, but the only path to genuine power? And why everything in your life begins to fall into place the moment you stop trying to force it? Part 1. Silence is the frequency of power. In a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, silence has become revolutionary. We live in constant noise, endless notifications, voices demanding our response, opinions requiring our defense, and beneath it all, an exhausting belief that if we're not speaking, we're not present. If we're not explaining, we're not understood. If we're not performing, we're not valuable. But Jung understood something most people never grasp. The ego, that part of us that needs to be seen and validated, lives on noise. It feeds on reaction, on proving itself, on maintaining the persona, the social mask we wear to fit into the world. And the more we feed the ego through constant expression, the more we distance ourselves from the self, that deeper center Jung described as the true organizing principle of the psyche. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It's the withdrawal of energy from the superficial layers to the profound ones. It's the moment when you stop broadcasting your internal state to every passing observer and instead create a container for that energy to concentrate, to transform, to become potent. Think of it like water. When water is scattered across a surface, it evaporates quickly, leaving no mark. But when that same water is gathered, focused, pressurized, it can cut through stone. Your energy works the same way. Scattered through constant expression and explanation, it dissipates. Focused through silence, it becomes irresistible. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Silence is the gateway to that consciousness." Because in noise, all you hear is the ego's endless chatter, its fears, its need for approval, its rehearsed responses. But in silence, deeper voices emerge. The intuition that knows without knowing how, the wisdom that doesn't need to justify itself, the authentic self that exists beneath every role you play. Consider someone caught in an argument with a loved one. In that heated moment, the instinct is to respond immediately, to defend, to prove you're not wrong. Words tumble out, driven by the ego's need to maintain its position. But once the argument cools, you realize most of what you said held no real meaning and may have deepened the wound. Now imagine choosing silence in that same moment. Not the cold silence of withdrawal, but the conscious silence of someone who refuses to let the ego dictate the response. In that pause, something shifts. The limbic system, that ancient part of the brain governing emotion and reaction, begins to settle. The prefrontal cortex, the center of wisdom and perspective, gains space to operate, and suddenly you see clearly, not through the lens of defense, but through the lens of truth. This is the power that noise can never access. Clarity. The ability to see the whole picture rather than just your wounded part of it. And that clarity is magnetic because it's so rare. In a world of reactive people, the one who can pause, who can observe without immediately defending, holds invisible authority. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. When we enter silence, when we stop the constant mental chatter, the default mode network of the brain activates. This is the neural system responsible for self-reflection, for integrating memories, for creating coherent narratives about who we are. In other words, silence allows the brain to process, to heal, to reorganize itself at deeper levels. But Jung went beyond the mechanics of the mind. He understood that silence creates resonance with what he called the collective unconscious, that vast repository of human experience and archetypal patterns that connects all of us beneath the surface of individual awareness. When you're silent, when you're focused inward, you're not just organizing your personal psyche, you're aligning with deeper currents of reality itself. This is why silent people often seem to know things they shouldn't know, why they make decisions that turn out to be right without being able to fully explain why. They're not psychic, they're attuned. They've stopped drowning out the deeper signals with the noise of the ego. And here's the paradox that most people miss. The more silent you become, the more powerful your words become, because silence creates scarcity. In economics, scarcity creates value. In communication, the same principle applies. When you speak rarely, when you choose your moments carefully, people lean in. They sense that when you do speak, it carries weight. Observe someone building something real, a business, a skill, a body of work. If they constantly announce their plans, posting every intention, sharing every small victory, they feel a fleeting satisfaction. Studies in motivational psychology show that announcing goals releases dopamine in the brain, similar to actually achieving them. But this is borrowed satisfaction. It depletes the drive to actually do the work. Conversely, the person who chooses silence, who focuses on daily effort without announcement, accumulates real power, not the power of image, but the power of substance. And when they finally reveal what they've built, it lands with undeniable force, because it's real. It's not performance, it's proof. This is why silence is magnetic. Because in a world of performers, the substantial person stands out not by trying to stand out, but by simply being solid. Their energy isn't leaking through constant expression. It's concentrated. And concentrated energy, whether in physics or psychology, creates a field of attraction around itself. Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But for that transformation to occur, you must have substance to offer. And substance is built in silence, in the hours when no one's watching, in the choices no one sees, in the internal work that never makes it to social media but shows up in everything you do. So before you rush to explain yourself, to defend your position, to announce your plans, ask yourself, am I feeding the ego or building the self? Am I scattering my energy or concentrating it? Am I performing power or actually becoming powerful? The answer lies in silence. Not as a tactic, but as a way of being. Not as manipulation, but as alignment with the deepest truth of who you are. Part 2. Focusing on yourself is not selfishness, but awakening. But that silence, that withdrawal of energy from the external world, only gains meaning when directed somewhere. And the only worthy direction is inward, toward the personal journey Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. This is where so many people stumble. They confuse self-focus with selfishness. They believe that turning inward means abandoning others, placing the ego above all else, becoming isolated and cold. But Jung would tell you this is a fundamental misunderstanding. Self-focus isn't selfishness. It's the only path to awakening. Because only by becoming yourself can you truly be present for others. We're conditioned by a society that glorifies sacrifice, where self-forgetfulness is considered noble. From childhood, we're taught to think of others first, to prioritize the collective good, to suppress our needs for the sake of harmony. It all sounds virtuous, but taken to extremes, it creates shadows of people. We give until depleted, strain to please everyone, and one day wake up strangers in our own lives. Jung called this the loss of the authentic self. What remains is only the persona, the social mask. And beneath that mask, in the realm Jung called the shadow, all the rejected parts, the suppressed needs, the denied truths accumulate like pressure in a sealed container. Eventually, that pressure explodes as illness, depression, rage, or complete collapse. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean withdrawing into narcissism. It means returning to reconnect with your own center. Imagine you're an ancient tree. If you don't nourish your roots with soil, water, and light, you cannot offer shade to anyone. A tree cannot say, I need no sustenance. I exist only to shelter others. That would be death, not virtue. Humans operate by the same principle. If you neglect your inner world, if you fail to build your own foundation, you will exhaust yourself into what we now call burnout. Not the fashionable kind that gets sympathy, but the deep spiritual exhaustion where you've given so much of yourself away that you no longer know who you are. Jung emphasized this point repeatedly. Self-focus generates radiating power, not isolation. When you tend to your own growth, when you nourish your own depths, you don't become less capable of love. You become more capable because you're no longer giving from depletion. You're giving from overflow. Consider the mother who sacrifices endlessly for her children. She works without rest, abandons personal interests, overlooks her own health. Her love is real. But do you see how many children of such mothers grow up anxious, insecure, because they sense their mother's exhaustion, her resentment, her martyrdom, and their unconscious learn that love means suffering, that connection requires self-betrayal. In contrast, a mother who maintains her own wholeness, who reads her books, pursues her interests, guards her rest, teaches a different lesson. She shows that love means living fully with oneself first, so you can radiate peace to others. This is what Jung meant when he said that the greatest gift you can give another is your own transformation. Modern psychology confirms this. Research on emotional regulation shows that individuals who prioritize their inner needs demonstrate better impulse control, wiser decision-making, and healthier relationships. Those who constantly ignore themselves to appease others become prone to anxiety, depression, and feelings of being used. They believe they're living altruistically, but Jung would say they're living in bondage to the shadow. Every time you suppress your authentic needs to maintain approval, that rejected part doesn't vanish. It sinks into the unconscious, growing stronger, until it erupts as bitterness, illness, or sudden inexplicable actions that sabotage everything you've built. This is why self-focus isn't just wise, it's necessary. It's how you dissolve the shadow before it devours you, because the shadow doesn't go away through denial. It integrates through acknowledgement. And acknowledgement requires that you turn your attention inward and face what you've been avoiding. Jung always stressed, you cannot give the world what you yourself lack. If you hold no peace within, you spread tension. If you carry no self-love, you offer only bitter sacrifice that breeds resentment in both giver and receiver. Self-focus is the process of filling your own cup first, not so you can withhold from others, but so you have something real to offer. And here's what makes us truly magnetic. When you're whole within yourself, when you've done the work of integration, people sense it. Not consciously, perhaps, but at the level Jung called the collective unconscious, that deeper field where authentic presence registers like a frequency. You no longer carry the desperate energy of someone who needs validation. You no longer emit the subtle manipulation of someone who gives only to receive. You no longer project your unmet needs onto every relationship, hoping others will complete you. Instead, you stand as a complete person, and completeness attracts. Think of those rare individuals who seem to draw people effortlessly. Not through charisma or performance, but through a quality of presence that's difficult to name. Jung would say they've achieved a degree of individuation. They've integrated enough of their shadow, reconciled enough of their inner conflicts, that their energy is unified, and unified energy is magnetic because it's whole. This is why crisis often precedes breakthrough. Loss, illness, betrayal, these experiences force us to stop focusing outward and turn inward for survival. And in that forced inward journey, many discover depths they never knew existed. They emerge from crisis more grounded, more authentic, more genuinely powerful than they were before. Consider someone who loses everything in midlife: career, relationship, health. All the external structures that define them crumble. At first, it feels like death, but if they choose to turn inward rather than immediately rebuilding the same structures, something profound happens. They meet themselves, perhaps for the first time as adults. They discover what they actually value versus what they were taught to value. They learn to distinguish their authentic voice from the chorus of expectations. And when they rebuild from this place of genuine self-knowledge, everything is different. The new career aligns with actual interests, not just what looks impressive. The new relationships are based on authentic compatibility, not fear of being alone. The new life has integrity because it's built from the inside out. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It's not a destination, but a process. A lifelong journey of becoming more yourself, less the composite of everyone else's expectations. And paradoxically, the more yourself you become, the more universal you become. Because beneath the social masks we all wear, beneath the personas we've constructed, Jung believed there exists a common human essence connected through the collective unconscious. When you focus on yourself deeply enough, you don't become isolated. You become connected to something far larger than your individual ego. You touch the archetypal patterns, the fundamental human experiences that unite us all. And from that place of deep self-knowledge and connection to the universal, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to attract, but because you've aligned with truth. So when you feel guilty for prioritizing yourself, when voices internal or external accuse you of selfishness, remember, you're not abandoning the world. You're preparing to truly meet it. Not as a performer seeking applause, not as a martyr seeking sympathy, but as a whole person capable of genuine connection. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. And that privilege requires the courage to focus inward, to face the shadow, to integrate what you've rejected, to build a self that stands solid regardless of external validation. This is not selfishness. This is awakening. And awakening makes you magnetic, because authenticity is the rarest quality in a world of masks. Part 3. Why things fall into place when you are silent and focused. And then, as you gradually live in alignment with that authentic self, something remarkable begins to happen. The external world seems to shift. What once felt like struggle becomes flow. Obstacles dissolve. The right people appear. Opportunities surface that you never sought, but perfectly match where you've been heading. You might dismiss it as coincidence, but Carl Jung would tell you it's something far more profound. He called it synchronicity, the phenomenon of meaningful coincidence where the inner and outer worlds mirror each other. Jung believed that when a person enters deep harmony with their inner truth, the external reality begins to rearrange itself to reflect that alignment. This isn't mystical thinking. It's the recognition that consciousness and matter are not separate domains, but interconnected aspects of a unified reality. When you change at the level of the psyche, when you align with your authentic self, you're not just changing your perspective, you're changing your energetic frequency. And the universe, Jung observed, responds to that frequency. Think about it through a psychological lens first. When your mind is scattered, pulled into countless distractions and anxieties, your life reflects that chaos. Relationships strain because you're not truly present. Work falters because your attention is fragmented. Opportunities pass unnoticed because your awareness is clouded by internal noise. But when you become silent and focused, when you withdraw energy from the superficial and concentrate it on genuine growth, something shifts in your perception. Psychologists call it the reticular activating system, the brain's filtering mechanism. This neural network determines what information reaches your conscious awareness, and it prioritizes whatever you focus on. When you focus on personal development, on becoming more authentic, more skilled, more aligned with your truth, your brain automatically begins filtering reality to show you what serves that focus. The opportunities were always there, the connections were always possible, but you couldn't see them because your attention was elsewhere. This is the mechanical explanation. But Jung went deeper. He proposed that our personal unconscious connects to a collective unconscious, a shared field of human experience and archetypal patterns. When we live in alignment with our authentic nature, we resonate with this deeper field, and that resonance creates what appears to be magical coincidences. You think of someone and they call. You need specific information and you randomly encounter it. You reach a crossroads and the exact guidance you need appears from an unexpected source. Jung documented thousands of these cases throughout his career. He didn't believe they were random. He believed they were the natural result of psychological alignment, creating coherence between inner and outer reality. Imagine a tuning fork. When you strike it, it vibrates at a specific frequency. And if there's another tuning fork nearby tuned to the same frequency, it will begin to vibrate in sympathy even without being touched. This is resonance. And Jung believed human consciousness works this way. When you're authentic, when you've done the inner work of integration, you emit a clear frequency. And reality, which Jung understood as far more conscious and responsive than materialist science acknowledges, resonates with that clarity. What you need begins to find you because you've become coherent enough to recognize and receive it. This is why scattered people, those who are unclear about who they are and what they want, often feel like life is against them. They're not emitting a coherent signal. They're broadcasting static, and static doesn't resonate with anything. It just creates more noise. But someone who has focused on themselves, who has done the hard work of shadow integration, who has aligned their conscious desires with their unconscious truths, that person emits coherence. And coherence attracts, not through manipulation or forcing, but through natural resonance. A practical example, someone decides to change careers, not because they should, not because it looks good, but because they've done the inner work and discovered what genuinely aligns with their nature. At first, the path isn't clear, but they stay focused, learning, developing skills, trusting the process. And then synchronicities begin. They meet someone at a random event who happens to work in their desired field. They stumble upon an article that contains exactly the information they needed. They apply for a position that wasn't advertised publicly, but somehow appeared in their awareness. Within a year, they're established in the new career, and everyone calls it luck. But it wasn't luck. It was alignment. They became coherent in their intention and authentic in their direction. And reality, through mechanisms we don't fully understand, but Jung spent decades documenting, responded to that coherence. However, and this is crucial, you cannot fake this. Many people try to use positive thinking or manifestation techniques while remaining internally divided. They repeat affirmations while their shadow whispers doubt. They visualize success while their unconscious holds patterns of unworthiness. They project confidence while internally they're scattered and unclear. This creates dissonance. And dissonance is what prevents synchronicity. Because the collective unconscious, that deeper field Jung described, isn't fooled by conscious pretense. It responds to your actual frequency, not the frequency you're trying to project. This is why so many people attracted to manifestation teachings end up frustrated. They're trying to manipulate external reality while ignoring internal reality. But Jung's approach was the opposite. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, you can't attract what you want by pretending the shadow doesn't exist. You have to face it, integrate it, make peace with the rejected parts of yourself. Only then does your inner world become unified. And only when unified can you resonate clearly with external opportunities. Think of it like a radio signal. If the transmitter is broken, sending mixed frequencies, the receiver gets static. But when the transmitter is clear, broadcasting a pure tone, the receiver locks onto it perfectly. Your consciousness is the transmitter. Reality is the receiver. And synchronicity is what happens when the signal is clear. So when you're silent, when you're focused on genuine inner work rather than external performance, you're clearing the signal. You're dissolving the internal contradictions, integrating the shadow, aligning conscious and unconscious. And as that alignment deepens, the external world begins to reflect it back. Doors open that were closed. people appear who understand you, resources surface that support your direction. Not because you're forcing it, but because you've become energetically coherent with the path you're meant to walk. Jung wrote, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see it. The eyes that see synchronicity are not physical eyes, but the inner vision that comes from self-knowledge." When you know yourself, when you're aligned with yourself, you begin to see the meaningful patterns that were always there but previously invisible. This is why things fall into place when you're silent and focused. Not because the world changes, but because you change. And in changing, you access a deeper level of reality where consciousness and circumstance dance together in patterns, too intricate for the rational mind to grasp, but profound enough for the awakened soul to trust. The universe isn't chaotic. Only our minds are. And when we focus on ourselves, when we do the silent inner work of integration, the chaos dissolves. What remains is a clear channel through which the deeper intelligence of reality can flow. And that flow, that natural unfolding of synchronicity, is what people call magnetism. You're not pulling things toward you through effort. You're allowing them to arrive through resonance. And resonance is the natural consequence of becoming who you truly are. Part 4. Silence and focus are the gateway to depth. But something even more profound emerges from this practice of silence and focus. Beyond the external harmony, beyond the synchronicities and opportunities, there lies a vaster inner journey. For when order is re-established on the surface of consciousness, a door begins to open. A door to depths within the psyche where light and shadow coexist, where the small self meets the greater self, where Jung said the true work of individuation occurs. Depth, in Jungian philosophy, is not an abstract concept. It exists within you right now, this moment. But ordinarily, we live entirely on the surface, our minds occupied with endless tasks, meaningless comparisons, immediate reactions, roles we must perform to remain acceptable. The psyche becomes like a lake, constantly disturbed by wind. Beneath the surface, there are vast territories, ancient patterns, profound wisdom, but we never see them because we're too busy managing the waves. Only when the water stills, when silence is established and focus maintained, can you begin to glimpse what lies beneath. This is why silence and focus serve as the gateway. They restore to consciousness the ability to perceive depth, to descend below the ego's chatter into regions where transformation actually occurs. To truly pass through this gateway, you must create space for silence in your life. Not once, but consistently. It might be as simple as sitting in quiet for 10 minutes each morning before the day's demands begin, allowing the mind to settle without agenda. It might be the practice of walking alone in nature without headphones, letting external silence mirror internal stillness. It might be journaling at night, not to judge or fix yourself, but to allow suppressed voices the chance to speak on the page. These practices seem small, perhaps even trivial, compared to the noise and urgency of daily life. But Jung would tell you they're the keys that gradually unlock access to the deeper regions of the soul. Because the unconscious doesn't speak in noise. It speaks in whispers, in images, in feelings that arise when the ego's defenses are lowered. And those whispers contain the guidance you've been seeking externally while it waited patiently within. Think of descending into a deep cave. When you first enter carrying a bright torch, the flames cast wild shadows on the walls, distorting everything. You see only chaos, frightening shapes, darkness that seems hostile. But when you lower the torch and allow your eyes to adjust, you begin to see the cave's true form. Intricate patterns in the stone, veins of precious minerals, ancient carvings left by those who came before. The psyche works the same way. When illuminated only by the harsh light of the ego's judgment, by society's expectations, by the persona's need to appear acceptable, you see only surface. But in the gentle dimness of silence, when the ego's torch is lowered, you begin to perceive what's actually there. The forgotten parts of yourself, the dreams you abandoned, the wounds that shaped you, the gifts you never claimed because they didn't fit the acceptable image. This is what makes many people fear silence, because they know, consciously or not, that silence will force them to face what they've been avoiding. The questions that have no easy answers, the grief that was never processed, the anger that was deemed unacceptable, the desires that were judged as selfish. All of it waits in the silence, patient and persistent, and so we fill every quiet moment. Music, podcasts, social media, television, anything to avoid that encounter. Jung understood this avoidance. He called it the flight from the unconscious. We prefer the known misery of the surface to the unknown depths below because depth demands something from us. It demands that we change. But here's the paradox Jung discovered. The very things we avoid in the depths are the sources of our power. The shadow, that repository of everything we've rejected about ourselves, contains not just darkness but tremendous vitality. The parts we suppressed because they were too much, too intense, too threatening to our social acceptance. Those parts hold the energy we need to become whole. When you descend into silence and face the shadow, you're not discovering your weakness, you're reclaiming your power. The anger you were taught to suppress might contain your capacity for healthy boundaries. The sadness you've avoided might hold the depth that makes you truly empathetic. The wildness you tamed might be the creative force you've been seeking. Jung's process of individuation is essentially this descent into depth, this confrontation with the shadow and the integration of what's found there. It's not a comfortable process. There's a reason Jung called it the confrontation with the unconscious. It's genuinely difficult to face the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. But those who make this descent, who commit to the silent inner work, emerge fundamentally changed. Not because they've become someone else, but because they've become more themselves. They've retrieved the scattered pieces, faced the shadow, and integrated what they found into a more complete whole. And here's what makes this relevant to magnetism. Wholeness is attractive. Completion draws others. When you've done the depth work, when you've faced your shadow and integrated it, you carry a presence that others immediately sense. Not consciously, perhaps, but at the level Jung called a collective unconscious, where authentic presence registers like a frequency. You're no longer defending against aspects of yourself, which means you're not projecting those aspects onto others. You're not seeking completion from external sources because you've found a degree of completion within. You're not desperate for validation because you've validated your own existence through the hard work of self-confrontation. This is the deepest level of magnetism, not the surface magnetism of charisma or performance, but the gravitational pull of someone who has touched depth and emerged carrying that depth into ordinary life. People sense it even if they can't articulate it. They feel safer around you because you're not running from yourself, which means you won't need them to run from you. They feel more authentic around you because your authenticity gives them permission to drop their masks. Many spiritual traditions have known this for millennia. The Zen masters sitting in Zazen for hours, not to escape life, but to descend below its surface into truth. The Christian desert fathers withdrawing to desolate places, not to deny humanity, but to confront themselves in absolute silence where no distraction could shield them from their shadow. The Hindu practitioners of meditation diving into the depths of consciousness to discover what lies beyond the ego. Jung studied all these traditions and found the same pattern. The gateway to transformation is always through depth, and the gateway to depth is always through silence and focus. Not as techniques to get something, but as ways of being that allow what's deepest to finally surface. The Jungian archetype of the hermit captures this perfectly. The hermit withdraws from society carrying a lantern into darkness. The darkness represents the unconscious, the unknown depths of the psyche. The lantern represents consciousness, the light of awareness. The hermit's journey is the journey every person must take, descending into their own depths to discover what has always been there waiting. When you choose silence, when you focus on your inner work instead of external performance, you become your own hermit. You carry the light of awareness into regions you've avoided, and what you find there transforms you. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. The way roots grow deeper into soil unseen, until one day the tree stands unshakable in the strongest wind. From this depth, what you do in the world carries different weight. Your words are fewer but more meaningful. Your presence is quieter but more substantial. Your actions are less frantic but more effective, because you're no longer operating from the scattered energy of the surface. You're drawing from the concentrated power of depth. Jung once wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart, Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. This is the essential teaching. Those who only look outward, seeking fulfillment, validation, meaning in external circumstances, remain forever in a dream state, chasing illusion. But those who turn inward, who dare the descent into depth through silence and focus, they awaken. And that awakening changes everything. Not because the external world changes, but because your relationship to it transforms. You're no longer at the mercy of circumstances because you've found the unmovable center within yourself. This is the ultimate form of magnetism. Not attracting through need or manipulation, but attracting through wholeness. When you're complete within yourself, when you've done the depth work of shadow integration, you become like a sun. You don't chase warmth, you radiate it. And those ready for that warmth naturally gravitate toward your light. The journey into depth is not easy. Jung himself went through what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, years of psychological turmoil after his break with Freud, where he descended into his own depths and nearly lost himself in the process. But what emerged from those years was the body of work that would transform psychology and provide the map for others to make the same journey with more guidance. You don't need to go as deep as Jung did, but you do need to take the journey to create the silence, to maintain the focus, to face what arises in that silence rather than fleeing back to noise, to integrate what you find there rather than rejecting it back into shadow. And as you do this work patiently, consistently, without seeking immediate results, you'll notice the changes, not just in how others respond to you, though that will shift, but in how you respond to yourself. You'll feel more grounded, more certain, more at peace with the totality of who you are, light and shadow both. That peace, that groundedness, that integration, it's the deepest form of magnetism. Because in a world of people running from themselves, someone at home with themselves becomes a rare sanctuary, not a savior, not a guru, but simply a presence that reminds others of what's possible when you stop running and start descending into the depths where your true power waits. And so we return to where we began. In a world demanding your constant attention, your immediate response, your endless performance, the choice to be silent and focus on yourself is not withdrawal. It's the most revolutionary act available to you. Every time you choose silence over explanation, you reclaim your energy. Every time you focus on your inner development rather than external validation, you build substance. Every time you descend into depth rather than skimming the surface, you integrate power. This is not a quick fix. There's no 5-step program to instant magnetism. What I'm describing is a way of living, a commitment to the inner work that Jung called individuation. It's the work of a lifetime. But even small beginnings create noticeable shifts. You might start today, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of reclamation. 10 minutes of silence before the day begins. A pause before responding to criticism. A choice to work on something meaningful rather than announcing it. A moment of dissent, asking what you're actually feeling beneath the acceptable surface. These small acts accumulate. They create the foundation for deeper work. And that deeper work changes not just how you experience life, but how life experiences you. The synchronicities increase, the right people appear. The opportunities align, not through magic, but through the natural consequence of becoming coherent with who you truly are. Jung spent his entire career illuminating this path, not because he wanted followers, but because he discovered through his own descent that the journey into depth is the only journey worth taking. Everything else is distraction, noise, the ego's endless attempt to find externally what can only be found within. So if these words resonate with you, if you feel the call to silence, to focus, to depth, know that you're not alone on this path. Countless others have walked it before you. Jung mapped it with his life and work, and those walking it now, though we may be silent, though we may not announce our progress, we recognize each other by the unmistakable presence of someone who has touched depth and carries that depth into the world. Leave a sign if you're ready for this journey, not because I need to know, but because someone else reading might need to see that they're not alone in choosing the inward path. And if you want to continue exploring these depths, if you want guidance for the descent, subscribe, because this conversation is just beginning. The work ahead is quiet. It's deep. It won't trend on social media or earn immediate applause, but it's the only work that creates lasting transformation. The only work that makes you truly magnetic. Not through trying, but through becoming. Not through performing, but through being. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege awaits you in the silence, in the focus, in the descent into depths where your authentic power has always been waiting for you to arrive.